All right, we don't know the details. What we do know, or think we know, is that the president is planning to make some announcement on climate change tomorrow, an initiative that is told not to be a national climate emergency, but something akin to it. The read on all of this from Amos Hochstein. He is the president's coordinator on energy security, among other things. Mr. Hochstein, very good to have you. Thank you.
Be here. Thanks, Neil. Appreciate the time.
What are we to expect out of the president?
Well, I think the president's going to be, I'll let him speak to what he wants to announce, but I think that the important message is two things. One, we had a split screen this weekend, right? The president was in Saudi Arabia meeting with 9 of the Middle East leaders, discussing the strategies for the region, the interests of the United States, ceasefire in Yemen, and countering Iran. And today we have that split screen of President Putin going to beg for weapons and strengthening his alliance with Iran. And I think that puts things in real stark contrast to some degree to what the president was in Saudi Arabia to begin with. And as he comes back from the region, and he's going to be speaking tomorrow, it accentuates two things. We got to do two things at the same time. One, we got to make sure that we have enough oil and gas in the United States and the global economy to make sure that the economy grows and the prices for consumers come down. At the same time, we do need to accelerate the energy transition towards a cleaner and more renewable and more secure energy future in the United States. And I think we can do those two things at the same time.
Can't you do both? I mean, because if you're limiting traditional fossil fuels, I mean, and still putting the pedal to the metal on some of these alternatives, is now the time to be doing that.
Well, I think we have to do both, actually. We're not limiting production. What we're trying to say is that in the short and medium term, Neil, we have to make sure we have enough oil and enough gas, natural gas in the United States and around the world. And that's what we've been doing. Oil production in the United States today is higher than it was on average in the previous administration. And I believe that we're going to reach up
Well, there's a big difference in the prior
production.
administration before COVID and after COVID. But you did also say it would be horrible to see the resurgence of coal. Why is that so horrible? It accounts for about a quarter of the energy we get out of utility plants, and they power up all those electric vehicles.
Well, I think that we don't want to see the resurgence of coal because that is the most damaging fossil fuel of all to our future. And what we want to be able to see...
Look at Germany. They're going knee-deep into it right now because they need it.
Well, I don't want to be making the mistakes, repeating mistakes from other countries so that we get to a point where we need to do to bring back coal.
Why would coal be a mistake, especially when you combine with natural gas? I know you're not a fan of that, but those two energy sources alone account for more than half the power plants in this country. Get rid of both of them, you're in a pickle.
Well, Neil, I think we can agree that most people don't want to see a resurgence of coal. I think as far as natural gas and oil...
But they love their electric vehicles, right? And if coal is important to that, natural gas is important to that. The energy behind those cool vehicles.
Give me 1 minute. I think that we want to see oil and gas grow in the United States at the moment and around the world. We want to counter the shortages that we've had in those fuels and to make sure that the economy can grow. Nobody's disputing that. In fact, the president has called on producers in the United States to increase production, and we've been working with OPEC and with producers around the world to make sure that we have those resources in the United States.
What's in their interest to increase production when you go say that the future isn't them? And you actually ask for it from Saudi Arabia. It's weird, right?
Well, Neil, I got to tell you that most producers actually understand that the future is in renewables and the future is in electric vehicles. It's just why
Saudi Arabia were you asking the Saudis to produce more oil?
Saudi Arabia is actually investing in electric vehicles. Here's an oil country that's investing in electric vehicles. Look at UAE, one of the largest producers in the world, actually investing
No, you're right on all of that. So you're right on all of that.
Country.
But by the same token, we learned that the president asked the Saudis to increase oil production. And at the best, when they were all done, they kind of had the same reaction my dad used to ask. We'll see. So they didn't do that. Will they?
That's actually, none of that is accurate, Neil, actually. I was there.
What did they commit to with production? What did they say?
I promise you I'll answer you if you let me. The president did not ask for oil production increases. We have a continued conversation with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, with Kuwait, with everybody else.
And what did they say?
In OPEC. Well, a few days before the president...
Because I read their official statement.
I promise you I'm going to answer you.
Okay.
A few days before the president announced his trip, OPEC announced that they were increasing production for July and August. There was a headline today already that Saudi's production is growing to an all-time high, its exports. And I've read their statements as well. We've worked with them very closely. I expect that we didn't meet with OPEC in this meeting this weekend, but there will be an OPEC meeting coming up. We'll see what they do. But I think that we have a common understanding between the producers of OPEC and the United States that the market needs to be supplied to the degree that it is necessary to support economic growth.
So you're saying they've agreed to increase production. I didn't hear that, so, sir, I'll have to defer to you. But I do know that you were asking for the same kind of thing from the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, UAE, all part of that. Did any or all of those countries similarly commit to increase oil production?
Again, we did not have that conversation with those countries. The president did not make that request. However, I believe that when OPEC, as it did on June 1st, and made a increase in production already, a 50% increase in production for July and August, I believe that we'll see what happens in August. I believe that we have a common understanding of supplying the market. And look, Neil, it's really critical to understand. Just about a month ago, 5 weeks ago, we had oil prices at over $120. And all the analysts on your show and every other channel were saying we're going to 180. Some said 350. Gasoline was over $5 a gallon, and everybody said it's going to $6, $7, $8, and $9 a gallon. And instead, we're at $103 for oil, so $20 decline in oil. And gasoline, the average is $4.50 or $4.48 today. But I got to tell you, the most common gasoline price in the United States today is $3.99.
Well, wait a minute. So you're taking credit for the decline, but on the upside, it was Vladimir Putin and the war. Well, what is it?
I think that we are in a war, and we have to continue to acknowledge that there's a ground war in Europe, with one of the parties in that ground war is the third largest producer in the world. That puts a lot of pressure on the risk premiums on oil and eventually on gasoline.
So you think these prices will continue to decline? That you're quite right, 35, 36 straight days of that. So we'll watch closely. But I'd be remiss, sir, if you were in on that meeting, where the issue of Jamal Khashoggi came up. And I'm curious how it came up, because the Saudi climate envoy says the president never brought it up, and he was at that meeting.
So the climate envoy did not say that. He said he didn't hear it, and from where he was sitting, that's quite possible. I will say that
were you closer to where the president was sitting when he brought this up with Mohammed bin Salman than the climate envoy?
I heard the conversation. I can tell you I heard the conversation very clearly, and the Saudi ambassador to the United States actually gave her account of it as well, and talked about the fact that it was. I'll let her words speak for themselves.
Sure.
But the president raised Khashoggi, raised human rights more broadly. The Crown Prince engaged in the conversation. I would say that it was a very direct conversation. Both of them were engaged in a direct conversation, very candid, very direct.
How long did it last? Was it? I know you said that. I think you said that the president started out raising this with Khashoggi, and I guess others in the room. And how long did that back and forth go?
I don't know. It wasn't just one statement versus another to get rid of the issue. This was a significant and serious conversation on the U.S. perspective on human rights and on what happened, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. It was a serious conversation that both sides engaged in. It was a significant conversation. I'm not going to go into how many minutes and so on. That's less relevant to go into that debate. But the president raised it very directly, as he always said he does. And I got to tell you that I've traveled with the president before. Human rights is almost always on the agenda. It's always on his plate and always on his concern. And because he believes it's not only his concern, it's the concern of the United States of America. It's the values that we stand for.
Were you surprised? Was he surprised then by the reaction to his trip, and particularly the fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman, that in retrospect it was a mistake?
You know, this is a trip that had historic consequences. Just the flight over there, when we flew there from Israel to Jeddah, was the first time in history that flight, that a direct flight from Israel to Jeddah took place. They opened the skies to to aircraft to and from Israel. After 7 years of a war in Yemen with thousands of casualties and people dying in that war, we've now had, as a result of this meeting, the negotiations ahead of it, the longest period of a ceasefire. We talked about countering Iran. We talked about joint investments in renewable energy, in understandings in nuclear power. We talked about 5G. There was enormous amount of achieved deliverables, of achieved success in this trip. I think the fist bump, if it was a handshake, you'd ask me why was it a handshake, if it was a fist bump.
No, and you're quite right. We have to deal with who we have to deal with. We had to negotiate with Joseph Stalin and ending World War II, and he was no choir boy. So I understand where you're coming from. But I'd be curious what your take is. You have a seat at these tables, and so you would know what Mohammed bin Salman is like, and he has been deemed a murderer of this Washington Post journalist. And I'm just wondering whether you share that view that Mohammed bin Salman is a murderer.
Look, we were there to discuss, and I've traveled to Saudi Arabia many times over the last 30 years and 27 years and over the last 6 months. The most important thing that I think that we should be focused on is what is good for American interests, for the American people.
And talking to someone like Mohammed bin Salman is part of that process, it sounds like, right?
Leaving a vacuum in the Middle East to allow China and Russia to take over and take a foothold.
I understand
there.
that. I understand.
That
but
is bad for
these
our
are part of the
interests.
realities of diplomacy, right? You have to still talk to this guy. You can't ignore this guy. Is that the end result?
At the end of the day, we have to go to the region. We have to engage its leaders. We have to engage, the president engaged first in Israel and with the Palestinian Authority, and then with 9 leaders in the Middle East. So he met with the entirety of the Middle East. And I'll tell you again, I'll repeat what I said before. The split screen of the president meeting with the 9 leaders of the Middle East while Putin is in Iran, that is the focus, not a fist bump or not. It's about Iran supplying UAVs and military equipment to the Russians to execute a war in Ukraine. And where the president is, he's sitting in Jeddah with the 9 leaders of the Middle East, I think, to prevent Russia and China from engaging there and taking a foothold there. That's what we should be focused on. And if we could do that while we reduce the price of oil by $20 a barrel, while reducing gasoline prices to at the fastest rate in a decade,
no matter who you have to deal with, right?
No
matter who you have to deal with, right?
Thanks, Neil.
Okay. Amos Hochstein, the Special Presidential Coordinator for International Energy Affairs.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.